Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we explore the future of food in a world of connected technology. I'm Bikram Ghosh, and I have the pleasure of managing the University of Tasmania's Industry 4 Test Lab, one of 6 university-hosted test labs in the country, funded by the federal government. And our area of focus is the integrity of food. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But while connected technology is a worldwide phenomenon, any conversation about food and drink is intrinsically and inextricably linked to place. And we're very fortunate in so many ways to be able to have today's conversation in Lutruwita, Tasmania. It's pretty special to be able to walk on country and live our lives here today, something that has come at the cost of effort and sacrifice of many. On behalf of today's panel, I take this opportunity to acknowledge the Palawa people, original and traditional owners of this land, whose custodianship of Lutruwita continues today despite the devastating impacts of colonization. We honor those who have fallen, celebrate those who are with us today, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Now, while this part of the world is inarguably rich in food, drink, and the cultural aspects of life that are associated with this, there are nonetheless both existing challenges and those that new challenges that we might anticipate with changes that are happening in industry, environment, and markets today. So the use of connected technology, particularly within the context of Industry 4, is a change sweeping across various sectors of industry. This brings with it new opportunities and potentially challenges in the food and drink sector, where the lines between science and art and tradition are very often very blurred. To explore what Industry 4 means for how we produce, prepare, and consume our food and drink, we have a panel of speakers that bring expertise, knowledge, and insights from very different, yet sometimes I think we'll find very similar perspectives. I'm sure those of you joining us today will have questions, ideas, suggestions for the panel as the conversation progresses. So please share them using the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll pick them up either as we go or towards the end where we've got some time set aside for it. On our panel today, we've got Professor Stephen Cahoon, Karina Dambergs, and Professor Vaughan Higgins. Stephen is the academic lead for our test lab, but he's also the director of SenseD at this University of Tasmania. And he brings with him a fantastic breadth and depth of insight from working with intelligent sensor networks over several years now. Karina is the CEO of Ferment Tasmania, but that is only the most recent among so many roles I know she's already had building and supporting the food and drink sectors in Tasmania, including as co-founder of Red Brick Road Cider and Hellsgate Distillery. So combine that wealth of industry experience with expertise and an abiding interest in the science underpinning it all, and it's really quite obvious why it's so great to have Karina with us today. We've also got Vaughan, who is an expert in the sociology of agriculture, having worked with a range of sectors, including dairy, rice, grains, beef. And his understanding of the people factors that influence technology adoption in industry brings a critical perspective to today's discussion that is often overlooked as technology is developed and rolled out across various sectors. But before we delve into that sort of complexity, Stephen, I might come to you first. So I've mentioned the Industry 4 Test Lab, and you are the academic lead. What does Industry 4 and the Test Lab really mean? Could you introduce us to those concepts and what the Test Lab has been doing and is hoping to do?
Great, thanks, Bikram. And like most academics, I can't really talk unless I've got a PowerPoint slide up in front of me. So I'll just share my slides right now. Okay, hopefully you've seen that. So one of the things I really enjoy is data. And one of the reasons for, or some of the reasons for that is because it's the data that gives us some evidence about decision making that we can make. It can also help us to challenge some of our perceptions of what is our perceptions of reality. It can also help us to discover new insights. And so it's with this in mind that's the work I do in CT, but also with this Industry 4 test lab, is all about that data and how do we discover these new insights. And the reason all this is quite important is because this is what will create the impact for industry, and the impact to ensure that the way as researchers that we work towards helping industry. So let me ask you to imagine having a vineyard and being able to work at a microclimate level, having data that comes right down to that 30-metre level, 30-metre grids, rather than at the moment 3-kilometre grids that the Bureau of Meteorology provide. Imagine being able to predict when a frost will occur to give you early enough warning so you can protect your crop. Imagine being able to understand when disease is likely to strike in your vineyard or on any of the crops. So whether that might be botrytis or downy mildew. Imagine being able to predict when a pest incursion is more likely to occur. Or even imagine if you've got a greenfield site and you're thinking, geez, rather than putting my current crops in, are there any other more valuable, those high value crops that I could put in place? Or if you had a berry farm, knowing that the flavours of the berries, why are they more sweet from one area in a tunnel than another? And then being able to manipulate that environment around it. And also imagine if we had things such as electronic tongues to help us to taste those flavours, or an electronic nose to help us smell the different beverages or food products. And imagine being able to print them out by a 3D food printer, food products. Well, that is really what the test lab's able to do. So all of those imaginings are things that are now real, and some of those we've already started to do during the test lab. And this diagram here really is showing what the test lab is doing. So the test lab was initiated, I might just go back first. So the test lab was initiated by the federal government. The federal government said, look, we need to have ways of increasing the competitive nature of our small to medium enterprises. And what we're going to do is set up 6 test labs around Australia, each one linked to one of the industry growth centres, such as defence, mining, energy, and so on. And also they'll be linked up to one university. And here in Tasmania, we're very, very fortunate that we have one of those test labs, one of those 6 test labs, and ours is on the integrity of food, which fits lovely with what our expertise here in Tasmania is. Also, we are one of the 270 or so test labs around the world. And the purpose of these test labs is to help industry to demystify what do we mean by the Internet of Things and Industry 4. How can we help them to de-risk all the use of these new technologies? So if we think about in terms of Internet of Things, of being interconnected devices out there monitoring all different types of environmental conditions and other conditions, now starting to get links together into supply chain focus, where everyone's able to share that data amongst those businesses in the supply chain. Then we're starting to get towards Industry 4, where we're starting to get some more predictive capabilities to be put in place. One of the features that makes our test labs so different to all the other test labs is that most of the other test labs are these big pieces of equipment that someone needs to go into university and have a look at. With ours, we made a very conscious decision that we wanted to go out to industry. So as much of our equipment as possible is portable and can go out onto the properties and into the offices of our industry partners for them to trial in conjunction with the researchers. So they get a real feel in a sandbox, really, of what the potential benefits are of these technologies, and very importantly, how can create value for them. And bringing all that together is a multidisciplinary approach across the university. We have people from the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture, engineering, ICT, IMAS, SENS-T, educationalists, our outreach people, all working together to make this successful, and of course in collaboration with our industry partners. So what this diagram really shows is that connectivity that we're seeking. Now, what we know is that there'll be some of our industry partners are saying, look, I'm really only interested in the production side of things, in that silo. And others will be interested in what happens more at the customer end to make sure they're delivering what they need to deliver. The holy grail for us is to work through some of the supply chains to see how we can start to link that together. And as an example, one I've already mentioned, in fact, is with the berry farms. We have one of our trailers that has about 70 sensors on it out on a berry farm at the moment, collecting a lot of data about what is happening inside those tunnels where the raspberries grow. So we have that data married up with the data that happens through the transport chain to make sure the environment in that transport route is meeting the requirements. And then we're also using an electronic tongue to taste those berries. And as I've already mentioned, can we then start to link that taste back through to which area of those tunnels that those berries came from, those sweet berries. So it is about the interconnectivity that we're interested in. Now I've only got a few minutes, so I'm just going to say, look at the production end. We're monitoring the environment at the production with all those trailers, and there are 6 trailers that will be going out around the Tamar Valley. They'll be going out to 3 vineyards, 1 orchard, a beef producer, and also a berry producer, to help them to collect a lot of data to better manage what they're doing. We've also got energy use monitors that we're trialling one here on the university campus at the moment to make sure it meets our needs, and that's been manufactured by a company, one of our companies here is called Compatibility. We've also got the TIA Smart Farm, which is starting to roll out technology on their farms in northwest Tasmania, which will be a real showcase for farmers to come in and interact. We've got things we can do at the harvesting end, but let me just skip right the way through down to the customer end, where our electronic nose and which can smell out volatiles in the food, and also the electronic tongue, which has all the 7 different taste receptors on it that mimic what we have. So, but it's of course much more reliable. So at the moment we're working with industry partners to find out whereabouts they can use all of this really cutting edge equipment that can be hosted on their properties. I just want to touch quickly on one of the other more educational focused ones, because we thought, yes, we should be working with industry to help them to understand and de-risk these technologies, but we also wanted to work with the schools. So we've currently got 5 of these farm bots, which are really raised garden beds with robotic arms. And you'll see in the dashboard image up the top there, that's where you say what you want to grow, and then positions it, the seeds. And the second image from the left is showing a little bit of a needle there that picks up the seeds, plants the seeds in designated areas. It weeds, it cuts out, it removes the weeds, that's the one in the middle, by stabbing them, and it also individually waters all those seeds. So there's a lot of robotics involved in this. There's a lot of Internet of Things, there's engineering, and of course there's agricultural science that all comes together. So we're currently working with identifying 5 schools that will have these farm bots to help them understand what is the Internet of Things and that wider Industry 4 aspects of it. So I think I'll just wrap up there by saying that we only launched in April this year. We've got our own website, and please feel free to look at our website. There's about 12 professionally done videos there that you can read through to listen to find out more about what is Industry 4 and how our industry partners are describing that. And please, if there's some, if you'd like to become more involved with the test lab, either contact myself or Bikram, and our contact details are provided there. So, Bikram, perhaps I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Stephen. Yeah, that's a great introduction to what we've been doing. And of course, there's been quite a lot of work that's happened in that space well before I was involved with Test Lab. Karina, you know quite a bit about that actually, because you've been involved almost since the beginning, I think. So Stephen's talked to us about all the capability that we have, both the technological, but also the expertise that's involved in the Test Lab. You've talked about, in previous conversations that we've heard, you've talked about collaboratively solving problems within the industry and looking at new opportunities, particularly in a Tasmanian context. How do you see the availability of this sort of technology and expertise, whether it's Industry 4 in general, just connected technologies that are maybe not, that don't necessarily fit the entire Industry 4 model, what Test Lab is doing, or anyone else in this space for that matter? How do you see this changing what we've been doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it probably comes back for me to what you touched on already, Bikram. Being industry, I've also lived up to the stereotype Stephen mentioned and not done any PowerPoint, so I'm here to tell a story and talk instead. But you said it already. I'm really interested in the problems that we can solve with this technology, and I think again it's a beautiful link. Stephen asked us to imagine we're in a vineyard, and my journey with thinking about how technology can help us solve problems actually started on a real vineyard, which was my parents' vineyard in the Riverland in South Australia. So when I was in year 12, my dad managed to break 2 vertebrae and get Ross River at the same time. So I had to go home and help him with the harvest, which for us was relatively easy in that we already used a lot of technology like barrel pruners and machine harvesters. But the one thing that used to drive me nuts when he went away was when my parents were away in spring. I used to have to go and stay in their room with the frost alarm. And I know Tasmanians like to tell me as a South Australian that it's very cold here, but where I grew up, we get frosts of -8, -9. And it really drove me crazy that we had enough sensors that a frost alarm could take the temperature outside and set off an alarm in the bedroom, but it couldn't automatically turn on the watering system for me. And I used to have to get up and walk in negative temperatures to the pump station. And I spent a lot of time asking my dad why, if you could rig it to do that, you couldn't rig it to turn pumps on, which is, of course, what happens now. And to me, that's the approach I've always taken. Everybody likes a cool bit of kit in my industry. Equipment's nice, testing equipment's nice, stainless steel is nice. But for me, the opportunity is what you do with it. It's the problem you solve. And if I look at it with a business hat, it's how you then use that to have a real commercial impact on your business. So it's got to be a real problem. It's got to have some benefit. It has to add value for your business to make it worthwhile as well.
So, I mean, one, I love the story, but two, when you say that it has to be worthwhile for the business, that makes complete sense. I guess what I'm really interested in teasing out, given your first-person experience with various parts of the industry, actually, is I guess, where do you see the difference? Like, is there a potential step change that you see Industry 4 approaches can introduce?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're just starting on some of this now. And I also think it's wonderful to see this food focus and an Industry 4 focus in Tassie, because, of course, a lot of us here, our industry probably has a higher than average proportion of small businesses. And in Tasmania, when we say small businesses, we often mean micro businesses. So I kind of feel like we're working on a program that can help us catch up and take a leap forward. So, you know, we're talking Industry 4 like we're moving on from Industry 3, but perhaps a lot of us in businesses in Tassie are still back at Industry 2, and we're not even using automation in our businesses. So I think it's exciting to think not that we're going to just go a little bit better, but we're going, let's be really ambitious and, you know, leapfrog Tassie ahead in how we add value to things as well. And I think the ways that we can do that are really quite interesting as well. Originally, when I first started talking about Industry 4 in food businesses, we used to talk about Industry 4 providing solutions to jobs that we'd call the 3Ds. So the jobs that are dangerous, dirty and dull. So ones no one wants to do, or ones like I've seen. So I used to work at I was going to say Lion, but it's now Saputo Cheese Factory in Burnie. And one of the great applications I saw was putting robotics in to turn the cheese boards, which was a job where traditionally, as you can imagine, you got a lot of back industries and manual handling issues as well. But I think to pick up on Stephen's point again, what I hadn't thought about when I was at that stage of thinking about Industry 4 was what it lets you do with data. And, you know, what you might be able to do with data you wouldn't even have thought about collecting a manual way. It would have been too expensive. Just all this data that you can get makes me excited as well. But more importantly than that, I think it's also how you layer in things like machine learning to help you look at that data as well. So you're not limited by your preconceptions about this does this or by your lack of knowledge. I think there's some really exciting opportunity to learn more about what's happening in our processes through those applications.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, all this talk about data and technology excites me no end, as you can imagine. You know how much of a nerd I am. But I also realize that, you know, there's lots of technology and lots of information. I mean, I like what you said there. You summed it up really well for me, where, you know, everybody likes a cool bit of tech, but usually every tech conversation is about anything but the tech. The tech is just the enabler, right? And I guess this is a perfect time to throw to you, Vaughan. I mean, we've got this tech. Stephen's talked about all of the capability and expertise we've got within the test lab, but that's only a microcosm of what Industry 4 offers. Karina, you were talking about how we can embed this and the opportunities that there are for problem solving. So Vaughan, we've had technology like this, examples of it in other sectors for quite a while now. So why isn't everybody in the food and drink sector all over this already? What are the challenges there?
Yeah, look, thanks, Bikram. And look, a lot of the research that I've been engaged with in social sciences very much focuses on this question at a farm production scale. And a lot of the reasons for that is because most of the research has traditionally focused on farmers and farming. So I guess that's where I am keen to focus my attention, and then perhaps we can expand out the discussion from there. So look, I think I guess the way that I'd like to get at this is to focus on three core issues that are really pretty well established in social science research. And they're certainly not exhaustive, but they do provide some interesting insights, I think, into some of the broad challenges that might need to be considered in achieving more widespread implementation of Industry 4 technology in farming, but also along supply chains as well. And the first of those, I think, from my perspective, is around understanding industry priorities. And I guess the key question here is how and in what ways is Industry 4 technology a strategic priority for specific farming industries? So social research has found that industry often prioritise those technologies that enable production to respond to rapidly changing market demand, and also competition for what are often limited resources such as water, and also those technologies that are perceived as being easily taken up by farmers or growers. Now, in some ways, I think this makes Industry 4 technology potentially problematic, as it's not always been widely proven in a commercial environment across a range of farming system contexts. And this can lead to the perception amongst some industry stakeholders that it might be too risky for farmers or growers to consider adopting. At the same time, and this relates to research that I've been involved in, there's often considerable ambivalence amongst industry stakeholders over the extent to which resources should be invested in Industry 4 research, development and extension. And that's often because established technologies are a known quantity and can be more predictable in their adoptability and also productivity benefits. Whereas these newer technologies, well, they can be recognised as being important in the longer term. They're much less familiar. The productivity gains can be considered more uncertain. So this can lead to industry stakeholders hedging their bets somewhat on this new and sometimes unproven technology. And in doing so, they tend to adhere to priorities that have worked well in the past. This can be important in ensuring a sense of ongoing industry control over research and development priorities, rather than perhaps stepping out and engaging with some of these more risky technology propositions. I guess a second point that I'd like to touch on here too is that we need to look at this issue in the broader context of growing dependence by farmers and growers on commercial inputs. So in modern agriculture, in order to remain viable, farmers and growers have to become increasingly dependent on commercial inputs supplied by off-farm businesses. That's fairly well established. But these businesses increasingly are fairly large corporate entities. They have growing power in the global agri-food system. This has obviously had a range of benefits from farm productivity, but it's also created a lot of dependence too, because these companies, for many reasons and for obvious reasons, seek to protect their commercial interests. And a good example of this in an Industry 4 context is the use of legal and digital locks on hardware and software packages that can prevent farmers and growers being able to tinker with and modify their own equipment. I guess linked to this is problems around the growing lack of compatibility and interchangeability between the platforms of different technology manufacturers. And this can undermine the ability to use technology in flexible ways that might suit the immediate priorities and goals of farmers and growers. Relatedly, it also leads to concerns that if farmers and growers go with the technology from one manufacturer, then they might be potentially locked into products that don't necessarily meet their priorities and goals in the medium and longer term. And look, just finally, I think a further issue is around uncertainty. Now, farmer and grower uncertainty is fairly well regarded in both the sociological and economics literature as a key barrier to adoption of new technologies. But if we look at this in the context of Industry 4, this really contributes to a fundamentally different mode of working for farmers and growers. So they're transitioning from experiential decision making to much more fundamentally data-driven processes. And in cases such as this, farmers and growers can be quite wary of changes that differ significantly from which they're familiar and comfortable, and which involve a shift in their identity too, from performing manual farm work towards being essentially office managers. Now, that can also be exacerbated by negative experiences with these Industry 4 technologies could be problems with compatibility or access, which can act to stall uptake by farmers and growers who are already struggling with adaptation to new modes of working. I should add too that uncertainty is not just confined to farmers and growers. Those who are expected to support the implementation of Industry 4 technologies at a regional scale can also experience uncertainty, and this is an emerging area within social science research. And this can have a pretty significant influence on how Industry 4 technology is promoted and supported. So in research that I've conducted, we've found that uncertainty relates to limited availability of independent Industry 4 consulting and support, a growing reliance on commercial agronomists at a regional scale, but limited interest, capacity or skills by these agronomists to promote Industry 4 technology, and also lack of support, or at least perceived lack of support, by technology manufacturers and retailers. So look, I just want to just finish by considering, well, there's all of these challenges that have been identified in social science research, but how might these be addressed so that Industry 4 technology can be more adoptable, certainly at a farming and regional farming level? I think firstly, we need to conduct more research on understanding end users' priorities and challenges and integrating these better into technological design. Now, in this case, when I talk about end users, it's not just farmers and growers, but also the broader local networks of advisors, agronomists, and so forth, who are part of the implementation and process. And of course, this can extend to other parts of the supply chain as well. This integration of end users' priorities, challenges, and preferences is really critical to ensuring that Industry 4 technology is tailored to meet industry needs. Secondly, we need to be ensuring that we develop technology that's flexible and that's trusted and that can be experimented with and adapted to existing practices, technologies, and farming systems. One good example conducted by some of my colleagues in North America is around open source software that's been developed in conjunction with farmers and industry. I think that's a really good applied example. And look, finally, I think we need to provide spaces such as research farms, for example, for farmers, growers and industry to experiment with and trial Industry 4 technologies that are otherwise considered too risky or uncertain to be used in a commercial farming context. So providing those spaces to play, I think, is really, really critical in overcoming especially those issues of uncertainty that I previously mentioned. So thanks. I think I'll leave it there, Bikram.
Thanks very much, Vaughan. As I was saying at the top of the conversation, this perspective often gets sort of left out or overwhelmed by the excitement around a new bit of kit, or the general agenda that's trying to drive adoption, but really it's a push more than a pull. So this is a really interesting point at which we could perhaps broaden out the conversation a bit more. So you talked about risk and this the role of uncertainty. I know from conversation previously, Stephen, this is something we've discussed as well, and you've talked about how our external advisory panel has helped. Karina, you were part of that. I identify some of the key priorities for Test Lab in this context in terms of demystifying and de-risking these approaches that we're talking about. As you said, Vaughan, otherwise there's a tendency for people not to want to fix something that doesn't appear to be broken. So two questions to perhaps start us off. One around maybe a little bit more concrete. So Stephen, you're sort of handling the nuts and bolts of this from a Test Lab perspective, and that's the entity right now that we can refer to for for introducing Industry 4 approaches in this sector. So how do you see the role of Test Lab or similar entities developing in terms of, to use Vaughan's words, these places to play in to try and de-risk and build up a level of maybe comfort, if not confidence?
Look, I'll probably start off by saying that those two words, demystify and de-risk, they were words that came from our industry panel. They weren't our words, they were their words. They were very, very clear that they said there's a lot of terminology floating around, there's a lot of new approaches and practices, and they just want to understand what that is. And same with the de-risking. There'd been a number of them that had been burnt before by adopting technology at an early stage, and they wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. And so that's why we decided to have this real portable approach to going out to our industry partners. So for us, it's all about helping them to understand where the value propositions may be. It's not about the sensors. It's about how this data that comes from the sensors can create real value for them. And that value may be in terms of efficiencies, where they no longer have to keep on driving down to the pump to check that it's working, but they'll be able to check that. But even more exciting, it could be where it starts to get into that predictive space. So what they'll be able to do through the test lab, and I'm sure, look, there's other examples on the smart farm. The TS Smart Farm is a perfect example of that, where they'll be able to work with this equipment in conjunction with the researchers who've got expertise in that. And it may be that the organisation says, look, that piece of equipment's far too expensive for us, but is there another way we can work with the university? It could be a subscription type service. It could be in developing research grants, and we'd be looking for funding opportunities to try to mitigate that financial cost to our partners. But it does represent a really good opportunity to almost have a try before you buy, and that's how you start to decrease risk. But the more important part of that is to help everyone understand where the value can be, and also where can the value be gained by having a complete supply chain approach to all of that data. Because at the moment, we might have people at different stages along the supply chain saying, look, now that I've moved on my bit of the product through the next stage, I don't really care. But nowadays, with the growing emphasis on aspects such as provenance and traceability, I think more and more actors along that supply chain will be becoming more interested.
Thanks, Stephen. That's, I guess, that trying to generate some of that pull aspect to getting people to come on board and try things and develop. And I understand, I've seen a couple of questions in the Q&A section as well about the possible involvement of vocational training institutions or scholarships, etc., that sort of thing. And I'm aware that we're all involved in trying to bring those sorts of opportunities to the fore. But coming back to what Vaughan was saying about, if there's this new technology that you're not familiar with, and you've got stuff that kind of works, right? There's almost this tendency not to want to try it. This happens from time to time, and there are some people within an industry who go yes, and some people with it who go nope. And you've got the entire continuum, which is just like change in any context. But Vaughan, you mentioned something about actually overall from all three of you, there was some conversations around competitiveness and being able to realize potential for people who are working within these sectors. You talked about data, and I always have this question when we talk about data about how we translate data into information. And Karina, you kind of started us down that line a little bit, and Vaughan, you were talking about it as well in terms of how we might be able to analyze it, etc. But where do all three of you see the potential in perhaps making the burning platform more visible for people. I mean, we're fond of talking about Industry 4 as something that will change what we consider to be work, right? Karina, you were talking about the 3Ds or anything like that, where we're talking about the future of what we consider to be jobs. But in terms of the industry as well, I guess there's an argument to be made that maybe we do need to fix something before it is broken. But how do we do this? How do you see this happening through Industry 4 approaches? Vaughan, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sure. Look, I guess my response from a social science perspective is that I think certainly historically there's been the temptation to focus on the technology first, then work out how it might be implemented. Certainly, in my experience, it's much better, rather than focusing on the technology, you need to focus on the problem that needs to be addressed first, and then adapt the technology around it. When we think about adaptability and adaptability, no technology is going to be implemented in ways that are going to completely be consistent with what the designers or developers want. That's why I guess I was saying earlier that we need to consider technologies that are sufficiently flexible, that can be shaped, adapted according to the needs of the users. So the first thing we need to understand is what are the actual industry problems that need to be addressed. Then how can we develop technologies that can be developed around those questions, and which help to address those questions.
So in some senses, it feels like this is a bit of a vicious circle, right? Where we're kind of cart before the horse when we've got the technology, but otherwise when we're talking about the problems, we might not have the technology to make that, to enable that. So how do we resolve that sort of a conundrum? Karina, you were talking about, and I saw you nodding vigorously when Vaughan started talking about focusing on the problem, and I absolutely get it. How do we bridge that gap, though, where we might need a solution that isn't there, or have a solution in search of a problem?
I think you have to have really good collaborative conversations about problems. Like I've said with the test lab, you know, I maybe I'm going to undersell what I'm like, Vikram, you know, because I am interested in how the equipment works. But what it takes to get this adaptation is not going out to industry and telling us about the equipment. It's going out and having a conversation about the problems that we have, and not going out prescriptively going, oh, I've got an electronic tongue, or I've got a nanopore and it can do this, but having those more broad industry conversations about, you know, what's a real problem for you, like what happens on your farm, experiencing it as well. I think that's the start of it, because sometimes the solutions come from unexpected places. So sometimes you need a fancy bit of tech to solve something, and you can actually solve it with a really simple bit of technology in the right application, or cobbling a few things together. And, you know, some of the examples I can think of is when I first started making traditional method sparkling wine, we used to talk a lot about how you'd look at it and see it was tiraged properly and make sure it was clear properly. And we talked about all this fancy stuff. In the end, most of the solutions came from the quality of cameras getting much better and pictures getting much better. And it turned out to be a really simple solution around just visual technology. So there's things like that. But I also really believe as well, to touch back on something that Vaughan said, we often think about the challenges for industry, but I think there are also challenges for academia and universities in this space, and challenges for government as well. So, you know, when we look at the adoption and what we do I hear a lot of people talking about taking tech people onto farms. Like you always hear it in incubators. I've got all these like tech startups. I've got to take them on farm. They've got to talk to a farmer. But I always wonder, why aren't we taking more of our ag students and teaching them technology? Because if we don't give them this skill, we're dooming them to be users of technology, and we're not empowering them to be in control of having the skills, or at least the language to talk to the people with the skills to solve these problems. So I really think as training providers, we need to think about some of those opportunities as well. The other space I see in academia where there's a challenge is we can do amazing research, but we need to think about the commercial aspects of this. So, of course, we can increase exports by solving my problem in my cider works or distillery, but that solution is a product or service in and of itself. So being really clear about how we might commercialise some of this technology, and that suddenly takes us global, regardless of supply chains, because if I'm having a problem as a cider maker in Tassie, you can probably bet that a cider maker in France or the UK or the USA is having the same problem. So there's a global market for that. And I think I said challenge to government as well. I really think it's something where, as a state, we could step up a bit and be a bit more proactive about this as well. So we've seen the effect on our agritourism sector of having adopted a agritourism strategy. You know, we're starting to talk a lot more about circular economies with things like the white paper in agriculture. Imagine what we could achieve if we also had an agri-food tech strategy, and we're having conversations about this as well, and getting industry, academia, government, community all working together on this.
I can almost hear choral bells go off as you speak of everyone working together. And you preempted one of the questions I had for all of you around challenges for enablers, like in this case, academia. A lot of the work that goes into this try before you buy approach, which, I mean, Stephen's taken a very strong position on with TestLab, a lot of that work gets lost because it doesn't obviously lead to an outcome. But the approach you're talking about in terms of looking at commercializable opportunities just in the solutions themselves or the service provided is perhaps one way. I wonder if there are others, though. Stephen, you've had a lot of experience working with all manner of industry, really. Where are the opportunities there to try and make this approach feasible? Because somewhere we have to be able to support this, so that, going back to what Vaughan was saying, we can build that comfort and confidence.
So as a university, what we're after is impact. We want to be able to make a difference. And just going back to a couple of points that Karina made, what this TestLab really provides is it is an engagement tool. It is an opportunity for us all to explore what it is that some of the issues that's facing industry at the moment. But it's also interesting that when we've talked to some of the companies where we're rolling out the trailers, these ones with the 70 sensors, what they've also said is we want to find out the things we don't know. So I think there's the driving force aspect of it needs to be solving particular problems, but also keeping our minds open that when all these different sources of data start to come in, how else can that be utilised? Because there's some things that we just don't know, and it's not until you get that perfect form of data coming together that you see the real opportunities. And there was another really good point that Karina made about how do we ensure that educational aspect comes through. And so that's why with those farm bots, now we were very, very keen to get these farm bots out into the schools so that the next generation isn't looking at a problem through one lens, they're looking at these problems through multiple lenses. So that's where you get the real Industry 4 opportunity starting to come through. And just in relation to the commercialisation aspect of it, as a university, that's something we're very interested in. We're wanting to see how, when we develop something, when we co-design and co-develop something, how can that then be rolled out into industry? Now, as Karina was alluding to, there is that commercial and confidence aspect to it. Now that we need to be very, very clear when we begin projects of how that will actually work, because the reason, as I'll go back to what the federal government said to us, they want these test labs to help Australian small to medium enterprises become more competitive. So we need to be able to work within that, because within that industry, there's all individual businesses who in some cases are competing with each other. But if we are able to develop a community of practice among those different players who come together, and this is why I really enjoy the concept of co-opetition, where we can collaborate with our competitors on certain issues and we compete with our competitors on other issues. And that's where we can slice and dice those outcomes and understand which areas should be commercialised for a particular company's benefit, but where other things should be shared widely so it lifts the whole industry. And just as a quick example, the 3 vineyards in the Tamar Valley, each of them said to us separately that they are really, really keen on sharing the data with each other, because they want to know why a condition happens on one property and not on another property, just as an example. So I think it's knowing where we compete and where best we collaborate.
Thanks. Vaughan, in the work that you've done, this idea of competition and collaboration coexisting, how does this play out in terms of barriers or enablers to adoption?
Certainly that element of competition can be somewhat of a hindrance, especially when we're talking about technology that's been developed by large agri-food companies that are operating at a multinational scale. I guess that contrasts in many ways with the more collaborative approaches that go on at regional farming scales. There's often very close-knit networks. There is that very strong focus on collaboration. So look, I think in terms of developing appropriate technologies that address problems, we need to start with those collaborative networks at a local and a regional scale, I think, and to utilize those a lot better to learn from what people are doing, and to value those local knowledge and practices.
This whole idea of communities of practice or even networks of collaboration is enormously exciting, particularly in a place like in a Tasmanian context. In previous roles, it's been really rewarding to see just what level of, I guess, adaptability producers in Tasmania seem to have. It just seems to be baked into the way we live here. And perhaps that has a lot to do with being an island community. We're quickly closing in on time. And I just wondered if I might throw this one last question out to all 3 of you, jump in, whoever wants to, around how we could pull these ideas together, particularly around these communities of practice, perhaps, and the ideas we have around education. I mean, Beth in the Q&A asked a specific question. Karina, I saw you answered that, but around what we're hoping to see in our future graduates. But those 2 ends of awareness and capability coming together to help with that adaptability and agility, if you will, for Tasmanian producers in the food and drink sector. Because Stephen, you were talking about competitiveness, and often we're talking about, often that brings dollars to mind, and that could be a race to the bottom line and trying to make the cheapest product, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best strategy for Tasmania. Your thoughts on how we can make this feasible and really enable that next level of change for Tasmanian producers?
I think what we need to do is to develop that trust and credibility with our industry partners. So we're starting on that path. In some cases, that journey has been going on for some time now. But it is a journey, and particularly when you're talking about emerging technologies, because these emerging technologies sometimes they come with some concerns about how will that start to impact on the people aspect and the sort of capabilities that they require. So I think with everything that we do, it's all about creating trust, showing that we're, as a university, that we're very, very keen to be able to help industry. And I think that it all becomes a bit of a loop, that then we have industry coming back to us because they know that we're keen to help and that we've got the capabilities to help them. And then that will just start to increase probably the complexity of the issues that we're looking at. So for me, it's a journey. It's not something that we solve overnight, but it's certainly something that as we hit different aspects of completing different projects or finding different solutions that do make a difference, then that there's when we create this community of practice, because practice isn't just between the university and the researchers, the university and our industry partners. It's also between the industry partners, because what we know is that industry will listen to industry, and making sure that we get, if we're engaging with our industry partners, trying to find the ones who will become the advocates and the ambassadors. They will be the ones who help to spread that Industry 4 approaches and practices throughout all of their colleagues. And what we're there to help to try to facilitate that where we can and add value.
Cool. I think perfect segue to Karina now. Karina, when we first got together about today's event, one of the conversations we had about it was about trying to build out a spectrum of events and offerings to raise awareness and build this comfort and trust, etc. And to Stephen's point about industry, listening to industry, I know that you're doing some things with Ferment Tasmania and other industry partners in that area, trying to build these conversations up. So just in a couple of minutes, can you tie some of that together for us?
Yeah, I think to us, it's I'm a bit prone to jargon and buzzwords myself, but I'm also very aware of them. And I feel like collaboration is actually one of those words. We throw it out all the time. We talk about being collaborative, and we don't talk about how hard collaboration is to get going. So in my mind, I sort of work it backwards. So I'm like, and Stephen's touched on some of it. So to be collaborative, we need to trust each other. But to trust each other, we need to have empathy for one another. And to have empathy with one another, we need to have conversations and start that process. And, today is a great example of doing that. We're having a conversation. We had it recently with an event that I know that you came to, Bikram, with our agriculture event, where we came to the session we actually called Conversations in the City, about having these conversations. And I did like to, that it's come up a few times tonight, I think that element of play and having fun with this as well. So Ferment has, and now the new organisation for agriculture and Launceston Gastronomy, which is our bid to be a UNESCO Creative City, is going to start having some of these conversations in a virtual sense and see what we can do around webinars and podcasts. So we're excited to share some more of that, with the ultimate goal of building a sandpit or a space to play, being cool. our fermentation hub. So industry can get together and learn the way we like to learn, which is to talk to one another, to feel the tech, sense it, taste it, get involved in it. I think that's something really exciting that we're trying to work towards as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karina. Vaughan, in the last couple of minutes that we've got, talking about conversations, and I just saw Sue throw in a question there about being able to speak across different languages, if you will, to sort of paraphrase her. What are your thoughts bringing us home on this in terms of having these collaborative conversations or productive conversations moving forward?
Look, I couldn't agree more with what both Stephen and Karina have said. I think those are really, really important points. I guess the only thing that I would add to that, looking at this from primarily a farming context, I think that, and also addressing Sue's point in the Q&A, we perhaps need to focus more on how we can utilise farmers and growers' trusted advisors as knowledge brokers or sense makers, so individuals who can bridge that divide between the technological world and the farming world, because that's a huge task in itself. And I think from a researcher's point of view, we need to be working with and working through those trusted intermediaries much more, because they will also be the foundations too of the social learning networks, the communities of practice, and so forth. Obviously, in doing that, one of the points I mentioned earlier is that it's not always the case that advisors have the necessary training. So I think there's some issues there that we need to think about too. But look, overall, I think that issue of trust is just completely central to all of these conversations around bringing together technological and farming worlds.
Thanks, Vaughan. That issue of trust seems to have resonated across the whole panel and with our speakers as well. Interesting angle on opportunities and possibilities for educational directions as well. Well, we're pretty much out of time. I'm aware that we've got some questions that we weren't able to answer, but please feel free to email testlab@utas.edu.au and we'll be happy to continue a conversation there. Stephen, Karina, Vaughan, thank you so much. It's been a brilliant conversation. Certainly for me, I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us and for your questions and insights. Well, with that, hopefully we have another event of this sort to look forward to pretty soon. In the meantime, take care, stay well. Thanks very much.